Matt Ziegler has worked in the financial industry since 2007 and is currently a managing director and private wealth advisor with Sunpoint Investments. He's a contributor to the Epsilon Theory newsletter and co-host of the Two Quants and a Financial Planner podcast. Matt's presentation today uses one of the most popular moments of internet culture in 2024 as a reference for how advisors can be prepared to handle the complexities of every client conversation. I absolutely loved the lessons that he pulled from this famous interview, and I think you will too. Matt, welcome to the Client Connection Summit.
What is going on? It's good to see you today.
It's good to be seen and good to see you back. So I wanted to talk to you for this summit for, a myriad of reasons. I really love the stuff that you publish, but you wrote an article recently that I had just watched the same thing that you had watched, and I saw that you had you wrote a LinkedIn post linking to a blog. There was a commentary on this piece of, I'll call it art or entertainment. And I was freaking out about it, and I saw you freaking out about it, and then I read your insights, and I'm like, whoa, Matt freaked out about this on a much different level, and there were some really cool takeaways in this that I thought would be relevant to our audience today. The thing I'm referring to is an interview with Conan O'Brien on the show Hot Ones. Do you want to give a little bit of background for people who may not know what this show is about?
So there is a YouTube show for the kids out there. And this YouTube show, the premise is basically you have this host, Sean Evans, and he brings on a celebrity guest, and they sit down at a table with 10 hot wings on the table and 10 hot sauces behind them of escalating heat. You're going to eat these wings. They're going to keep getting more and more uncomfortable. And for us, the viewing audience, it's like it's a slow motion car wreck. You just can't look away. And it's a wild thing to watch somebody who's famous get put through this ringer of heat.
Yeah, one of the things I love about the show is that the spice kind of oftentimes cracks the veneer of celebrity. That's like the polished persona that a lot of celebrities work really hard to maintain. They get into those hot sauces and their noses start to run and they start to sweat and they start to cry and they're in a lot of pain, and it's like the real them kind of emerges. And I think that's part of the reason that this episode has been so popular. But can you talk to me a little bit about why this specific episode, out of the probably over 100 episodes that exist of this show, stuck out to you and made such an impact? The one where Sean interviewed Conan O'Brien recently.
So I am a deep, deep story nerd. This goes back. This is my upbringing. I have multiple English teachers in my family. I had a pivotal moment in my own life, and like I'm taking 7th grade English with my 7th grade English teacher mom because I just transferred schools. I was in her class and I had to write this thing about Shakespeare. And yeah, 7th grade English Shakespeare is not the best time to learn Shakespeare, at least from your mom too. And so I go to my dad's mom, my grandma, and she's also an English teacher. And I was like, I have to write this paper. I can't ask my mom for advice. I have to analyze this character in this story. And like, I need some help. And she basically gives me this book of literary criticism. And I find out for the first time in my life that I had seen, those glimpses into like adulthood that you get when you're a kid. So I opened this book and it's like, here are two totally different and opposing ways to interpret this character in this story. And I was like, wait, hold on a second. Like, you can have two totally different approaches and still be right. And this, I think, started this fascination with understanding there were genres, there were different interpretations, there were plot points, there were beats, there were all these things, and you could start to see them everywhere. So when you would read Lord of the Rings, or you would watch a movie, or read the Batman comic book, you could see all this stuff play out. And you find the hero's journey, you find stuff like that, and it's just lifelong obsession. So my wife and I sit down to watch Conan on Hot Ones, which is a YouTube show that we've loved now for a long time, mostly for its entertainment value, mostly because we can sit on the couch and have a laugh, and it's just like, it's a good palate cleanse of just, you don't have to think too much and you're always entertained by it. And I think they're like 20 something seasons deep now. There's literally like crazy number of episodes. I felt like I was late to it several years ago when I started. So there's nothing wrong with getting on board now. But we sit down to watch it. Conan comes on. We're both huge Conan fans since the 90s. And my God, what a performance. Like, he came on in a way where he so understands the host guest interview format. He so understands story and narrative structure that he takes the already progressing level of heat through these wings and he takes it to a whole other level by understanding like the meta narrative on what's going on. We watched this episode. We're both in tears on the couch, my wife and I, laughing so hard at this thing. And like the first thing she says to me is, you're going to write something about this. I was like, we need to watch this again because yes. So I wrote this piece. It's up on the Epsilon Theory website. It's called How to Win at Story, Conan's Hot Ones Masterclass. And I literally break down all the little narrative things that happen. And that's part of why we're here right now. It's such a fantastic story of, if you understand how a story fits together, what you can do with it in the moment. And hey, last I heard, we're in the business of running, half an hour to hour long meetings and things like this, where we want to
Yes.
understand these beats of story. It's so applicable to the rest of your life.
Yes. And like, humans are stories. That is how we make sense of the world. It's how we make meaning of the world. And so every client that walks into your office, what they're walking in with is a story. And if you can help them as maybe the host tell their story in a way that makes sense and gives them their story may not have an ending yet. Maybe that's why they're in. They're at the point of the climax and they're looking for somebody to help guide them to the resolution. Having that skill set of guiding them on that journey is going to be really useful. So I'm assuming that what we're going to talk about today, well, I know that what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about that dynamic between the host and the guest, or between the advisor and the client, and how advisors today, like, this is how we're all kind of bringing this into one, into the theme of this summit, is what you can do as an advisor, steal from this interview and use with your clients to make yourself a better advisor.
I think the big three things, and I've got in the essay, if you want to read the full essay, it's a little bit, it's a deep dive. The three things I would say for this context are, anytime we're going into a meeting, anytime we're prepping for a meeting, anytime we're just thinking about an interaction we're going to have with clients, you need a structure. You don't need a script. You want to never forget the role that status plays. We'll get into a little bit about how that works, how to think about that. And it's okay, you as the advisor, to draw influence from everywhere, anywhere and everywhere. And what Conan does in this Hot Ones appearance is he shows that you didn't need to script this thing out. He didn't need to know exactly where it's going to go. He talked after this interview in several places where, and Sean Evans has too, where it's like they had no idea what was going to play out when he got to the set that day. Didn't need a script, but he did need to understand that structure. That was piece number one. Never forget the role that status plays. This whole idea of understanding the status between a host and a guest, an advisor and a client, a patriarch and the kids. One of the most useful things I think you can learn from the world of theater, but it's hugely applicable in our roles. And this idea that you can draw influence from anywhere. Conan also showed in this thing, whether he's telling stories from his career or he's pulling stuff just out of thin air, he knows what makes him him. He knows what makes him a good host and a good guest. We as advisors are obligated to do the same thing. We have to bring ourselves to that conversation, to that relationship. And that means we can't just steal it. We can't just LARP with somebody else's story. We have to come into this situation with knowing what makes us tick and then bringing that to the table. It's a true masterclass to see what Conan did with this show. And I think it's wildly applicable to our day-to-day work.
Perfect. So let's start at the top here. The first thing you said is that Sean and Conan did not come into this with a script, but what made it great is that they followed they understood the structure that was brought into it. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what that looked like in that specific interview, and then tie it into how advisors can use that in a client setting?
Every story has a beginning, middle, and end, and every story has some type of shape to it. The beautiful thing about Hot Ones, the show, in concept, just in structure, is that because you have 10 wings, you could basically chop the show up into 10 pieces and say, we have increasing tension on these 10 steps to the end of this conversation. And by the time we get to the end, we'll have completed the thing that everybody watching the show knows what the progression is. It's been perfectly telegraphed to us, and we're going to get to the end and we're going to see what happens. This idea of understanding that every client meeting, everything else has structure, is massively important. So a couple of points of like real interest to the structural awareness without script awareness that I think we can take away. Sean will always ask the guest at the beginning of each episode. If you've never seen much of the show, you don't know this yet, but if you've seen the show, like stop and notice this point. He will almost always ask first how the person feels about spicy food.
I ask in good faith, how are you around hot sauce before we get started?
I grew up in an Irish house.
It's not unlike in a client meeting when we ask people how they're doing in their personal life or how they're feeling about markets or how they're feeling about whatever we know is going on. But this is really important because what Sean is doing when he asks the question, how do you feel about spice? He's getting kind of like a baseline sense of what the awareness is. And on one hand, you have guests like Melissa McCarthy in her episode is completely like, I'm from the Midwest, totally apologetic. Just please, God, help me through this. I can't handle spice in anything. And it's wonderful. And then on the other hand, you have people like Idris Elba who are indifferent and then want to fight Sean by the end of the episode, or Conan in this case, who kind of plays both sides of the coin in the opening question, where he's like, I grew up in an Irish household. I never tasted a spice until I was like 52 or 42 or something like that. But then he's immediately starting to get into this whole, like, I'm not scared of this. I'm going to be okay. That expectation that gets set from the opening question to let you know we are at the beginning of this story is going to set up what that escalating progression looks like through the end. Now, in a client meeting, we're probably not trying to escalate tension towards the end. It's not an episode of Law and Order Special Victims Unit. But what this is it's a formula that says we're going to start in one place. I know how to end in another place, and I know how to close that thing up.
Yeah.
It's amazing when you have that awareness of what's going to happen in the middle or beginning, what's going to happen in the middle, what's going to happen at the end, going into a meeting, how you can start to shape that, even if you don't know exactly what the client's going to come into that meeting with.
One of the things that I really love about Sean as a host is also that he matches his guests beat for beat. So if he has a guest that just wants to take a little nibble, then he just takes a little nibble. If he has a guest that cleans the wing, then he cleans the wing. Like, he mirrors their level of commitment. You know, if they want a vegan wing, no big deal. We'll do vegan wings today. If you want to clean it all the way down to the bone and suck the marrow out, great. We're here for it. And I think that's another great example, just kind of building off of what you said of his sensitivity to where the client's at. He starts off by asking them how they are around hot sauce, matches them beat for beat. Based on their comfort level, might give them warnings about certain hot sauces, and kind of lets them dictate the pace and the level of commitment that they want to have to the conversation.
This idea of, and this is a perfect example of the last one of, like, you got to draw your influence from anywhere. You got to bring yourself to the table. When you're in the host role or you're in Sean's role or you're the advisor and you're running the meeting, one of these things is, you know, we all go through this stuff and it's like, oh, you do mirroring. And then you read Chris Voss's book and you're like, oh, I'm going to be a hostage negotiator in my client meetings and all this stuff. And that's great. But the reality is, like, you have to figure out how you are inside of that thing that makes them comfortable. And Sean is a master of this. And that point you just made, it's like, it doesn't matter if he takes a nibble or gets every little last morsel off the bone, and different guests do it differently. When Dave Grohl wants him to do a shot between like 3 shots practically between every wing, I don't know how they didn't like limp away from the set on that performance. But it's one of those things, like, he is there to make sure he is mirroring and matching the energy of the person across the table with him to get the best piece of show business out of that story structure, out of that arc. Because there's still going to be 10 wings. There's still going to be 10 sauces. That awareness of beginning, middle, and end and pace and how I can mirror to get the most out of them, that's a pretty good thing to bring to a client meeting, I think.
Yeah. And I think the show is a mix of a lot of different formats as well. It's like a flexible type of show. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So at the beginning of the essay I wrote, I posed this question because in trying to explain Hot Ones to people and why it's so interesting to me is this, again, it knows structure, but it doesn't have a script. So I will regularly tell people when I would be pitching the show, if you got to try an episode of this, it's an amalgamation of scripts. I like that framing of saying, like, what do you think? Do you think it's a late night interview style show? Do you think it's a game show? Do you think it's a reality TV show? Do you think it's some type of like weird procedural? What do you think this is? And people stop and think about it. And it's like, well, It's kind of all of them. It's like, yes, this is the beauty of it. This is what life is like. This is what like careers are like. These are what our client meetings are like. They're an amalgamation of scripts. Different ones can take over and play out, but that's why it's useful to know them. Inside of those scripts, we have different character types and other things that show up and reveal themselves. This is really important too, because when Conan basically says, like, I don't fear your wings, man.
I don't fear your wings, man. Bring what you got, okay?
And there's this whole great clip. It's the very, very front of the episode. It's like the 8-second snippet they show. It's actually from the middle of episode, but they put it up front on purpose. It's brilliant production. That's a whole other topic on this thing. But it's this clip of Conan saying,
What's gonna happen? What's wrong with you people? You don't know what real danger looks like anymore.
like this right here. It's giving us the context clue of this person. Tale as old as time, pride goeth before the fall. We have somebody who's ultra proud, who's ultra brave, who's going through something that we know is uncomfortable. We know in a minute later that the guy's never really had spicy food and doesn't eat spicy food by choice. And now we see him in this completely combative standoff mode. And you know it's going to break him. You know it's coming, because especially if you've seen other episodes of the show breaks people. It's just too hot. When you start to marry those things of we don't know what path this can take, all we know is that the tension is going to keep on escalating. Now, all of a sudden, the real stories can start to come out. And that's where Sean's a master of actually getting those actual stories to come out and guiding them through this ever increasing tension that the show's format gives him to play with.
Perfect. I have one last question about the structure versus script idea before we move on to the next point. And that is, in your experience, what are some of the structures that advisors should be preparing for that will help them meet with clients so that they can be flexible, they can be dynamic, and they can meet clients where they're at?
So without derailing us into a whole other part of what action items or things should look like coming out of a meeting, at the beginning of the meeting, understanding kind of what mentality people are in. There's meetings when you're trying to do something that's very tactically oriented and very specific. So we have to get these beneficiaries updated. We have to do this specific, insurance or legal or some other review. We have to set up a specific type of an account or something like that. When you're aiming for tactical stuff, you got to know where you want that meeting, how you want it to arc. Like if we need to end with getting this paperwork done, then make sure you structure that beginning, middle, and end to end getting the paperwork done. Other times, though, you're sitting down with somebody and they're thinking about something or they're nervous about something or whatever else. That usually comes out in the first couple of questions, so long as you ask a couple of questions at the beginning. When you see those things come out, even if you have a very tactical ending in mind on what script you think this meeting is going to follow, it's great to be flexible and go, oh, they're not here for that thing, or they misunderstood the thing, or they understand it in a totally different way than I realized before. That amalgamation of scripts realization means we can step back. One thing I'm always doing is at the beginning of a meeting, as I take that read, I have an idea of what I want the meeting shape to look like, where I want it to end. But if the client shows to me that they're really wrestling with another decision, or like a common example would be a retirement decision or something, that comes with a lot of blocking and tackling in a period right around the event. Or if somebody's passed away, or if kids are going off to college, all of a sudden they're empty nesters, or somebody's just starting a business. These all come with lots and lots of tactical steps and a concentrated period on the end. But sometimes they need to like waffle through a bunch of maybe decisions along the way. And when you realize that you don't have to close every one of those things down to a tactical step by the end, that also can help you with the shape that you run the meeting with. So knowing your opening questions, knowing how you're going to take the temperature of the room for the progression before you steer them through it can really help you get a sense of awareness on where you want the thing to land. That's an experiential thing. That's a thing you have to do a bunch of meetings to know how a good meeting ends, to have something that's worth aiming for. And that's another thing right out of the Sean Evans playbook.
Beautiful answer. Any common missteps that you think advisors fall into that would cause them to miss the target here?
They don't listen. That's number one.
Cool.
Number infinity. You don't listen close enough. You have to ask the questions and you have to pick up on those clues. The great thing about Sean Evans as an interviewer in this show is he's always listening to the answers that the interviewee's giving. And even though those 10 questions are pretty well thought out and ordered out, I'm sure by him and his staff and tested and all the other stuff, because they have little clips and videos and pictures and stuff they're going to share along the way. He's listening to all those things to help guide and shape that conversation. So when a client wants to come in because, hey, guess what? I picked my retirement date, or I picked the day we're going to sell the business or whatever else, that doesn't mean that's what this conversation is actually about. And I think the misstep from advisors is when they mistake what they think the meeting is about, or they take what they put on the agenda as the be all end all, then they don't stop back to go, this is about time with another human who has a level of expertise that's going to help me navigate these next steps. I need them to listen to me, not necessarily just tell me what to do, but to really listen to me and help listen for the things that I, the client, I, the interviewee, may not have exact expertise in navigating these hot sauces, navigating these complicated financial challenges. Help Sherpa me through that process. You got to start with that relationship, though, and make sure the relationship's intact so you can even get there. You start cramming in, you come in thinking it's a, an interview show and a game show, and all of a sudden I'm like, surprise, this is a horror movie. Can't tell you how many times I've seen advisors screw that up in my career.
Yeah, I'm sure it knocks the whole thing off kilter.
Real fast and everybody knows it's wrong. The advisor's like, I don't understand what happened in that meeting. The client's like, I don't understand how we got so far off topic. It's really easy to do, but it's all sourced in just not understanding these things and not listening to the person across the table from you.
Yeah. Well, I feel like this is a perfect segue into the next point that you brought up, that you learned from watching this interview, which is not forgetting the role the status plays. We're venturing into that territory of like understanding how to shape the conversation and drive it and navigate yourself to a certain place, a certain outcome. And a lot of your ability to succeed in doing that hinges on your awareness of the role that you play as an advisor in the room, and maybe the role that your client wants to play, or the status that they're bringing into the room with them. Can you talk a little bit about that and help me understand that at a little bit of a deeper level?
Yeah. So there's lots of stuff on this. If you're interested in the concept of status, there's plenty of things. There's been several books even in the last few years. My favorite is a book from probably the 60s, maybe the 70s, by this guy, Keith Johnstone, on improvisation. It's an improvisational theater handbook. It's fantastic. It was really hard to get a copy a few years ago. It's way easier now. The status seesaw exercise and chapter of this book is probably my favorite of any piece in the status literature. What this says is that in any interaction, and again, I use this because he's talking about it on a stage, and that's what we see with Hot Ones. In any interaction, you can think of two people on a seesaw. And this is transactional in nature. It's not just relational, but it's this idea that every interaction is either leveling the status or pushing somebody up. And anytime you push somebody up, you push somebody down. We don't like, we don't like as people to see anybody punch down. We don't want to see the politician belittling the little old lady or the crippled person or whatever else. Conversely, we love to see like Dennis the Menace shoot the thing at the stodgy old principal, shoot the slingshot. We love punching up. We hate punching down. Likewise, in a relationship, if I'm going to tell you, this is what you do, this is what you do, why aren't you listening to me? And now all of a sudden I'm an autocratic, authoritarian parent. Same thing. It turns into this tilt where it's like all coming down and it feels dreadful. Likewise, if you have something where something is really far down and all of a sudden it snaps it back up into place, that can be interesting too. As advisors, we typically want to keep that seesaw pretty level. We want to help build our clients up in their confidence. But in going down, it doesn't mean that they're punching down. It might be we're lowering ourselves in status, increasing their confidence in a way. In the other cases, we might be tilting them up, but actually I think of it as it's like a parallel shift, the entire seesaw higher as we elevate the situation. Now, a couple of interesting things happen when we apply this to Hot Ones. So the first thing is the wings are basically a status signaler on the show. It's part of the purpose they serve. Part of why Sean Evans asked that opening question, how do you feel about hot sauces? If somebody feels bad about hot sauces, we've taken that status seesaw and we've gone, oh, the hot sauces are up here. The person is scared. They're down here. It's a slight imbalance. Sean is going to play with that. If a person says, I got no fear of hot sauces, that's fine. Boom. Other direction. Now all of a sudden the person is saying, I have status above sauces and we're waiting. And they go, I'm really scared about retirement. Now all of a sudden about this thing. If they come and they say, I just made up my mind. I'm rolling all my accounts to somewhere else. We're going with whatever else. Boom, the other direction. Now they've raised their status. They've pushed me down. Knowing where you are in starting from in any one of these conversations, knowing how you're going to approach either pulling it back to level without being a jerk about it, or sometimes in life, where you are and how you're operating becomes really, really valuable. Another Hot Ones point. Conan brings in this wonderful character, Dr. Arroyo.
I brought my personal physician, Dr. Arroyo. This is Dr. Arroyo.
Hi, how are you? Amazing.
Yeah,
Hi, nice to meet you.
Okay. You don't have to talk to him, just to me.
Nobody brings a prop to the show. There's episodes where there's two guests. There's episodes where somebody else is like in the wings and comes out for a second. Thinking of like Billie Eilish and her brother. There's been a couple of these. But Conan brings a doctor. And he brings a doctor as a status rebalancer to the wings themselves, so that he can come in and be like, oh, the wings that I'm now afraid of, like I am of lower status to them because I'm a little bit concerned with them. But then he brings in a doctor who, doctors are professionals. Doctors are supposed to definitionally be of higher status than a comedian from a talk show. And he instead basically is like belittling this doctor and using him in a way to lower the doctor status, pushes up this whole pride goeth before the fall thing that Conan's setting up from the beginning of this thing. And it's a brilliant display of an understanding of status by the way he rejects the prop that's been put on the table. This is a long, long-winded way of me trying to say that if you start to see things in this client-advisor relationship as a series of these micro status transactions, you can start to understand when stuff is getting tipped out of way, or when somebody feels tipped into a corner, or they feel like they're taking higher ground and you're trying to figure out how to right size the ship. Such a simple concept, so deep. Man, I just went on way too long about that.
No, I loved it. I think you painted a really beautiful picture of how the dynamics shift and change in a room. And like, I think any relationship has these status shifts, this teeter-totter of, there's a book by a woman named Mira Kirschenbaum, and it's called Why Couples Fight, or Why We Fight, or something like that.
Yeah.
My history is in the relationship space, so this is like me making it kind of a comparison here. But she talks about how couples typically argue, not it's an argument over power, but it's not because they're trying to gain power over somebody else. It's because they're trying to regain it. They feel like they've been pushed down, and when you take power away from someone, they're not their best selves when they try to regain power. It's when sometimes the worst part of us comes out. And so I love this idea of like being sensitive to the power dynamics in the room, and how you might be backing somebody into a corner, how you might also be giving up your own power and becoming desperate in a conversation, or emotionally compromised. So what are some, I guess I'd love to hear a couple pieces of advice of.
Wait, hold on. I want to stick on this just for one more second, because this is really interesting. I think, to me, understanding it through terms of like status and not just power is an important point. And I think it's an important point because I might be saying, I ran the plan for you. I have the numbers. I have all these things. These are actually status increasing things that if the client is not feeling the boost from all these things that I'm telling them, I'm going, I did the numbers. I did the math. I have all the answers on what you should do in our optimally designed plan. There's an environment where that person feels like that is lifting them up towards confidence. And there's another interpretation where that person is feeling now disempowered by a bunch of stuff they don't understand. That understanding of like in this relationship dynamic, and this is where it's not just a transactional thing,
Right.
of understanding how you're framing and serving this up to a person so that you can make these microtransactions feed through to the relationship that you're trying to build with them, which is a relationship in our business of trust and confidence and all those things. This seesaw becomes a really, really important thing. It's all over the behavioral literature. It's just not often referred to as status. So the relationship literature, I'm a whole interpretation of the body keeps the score and where this stuff comes in. It's everywhere, and learning to start to read status in things and interactions between players, games people play, another great historic one that probably a lot of people have read. it just shows up everywhere as a way to interpret these microtransactions. And as advisors, again, one of the biggest mistakes I see is people will come in with an optimally designed or really intelligent idea, and they don't realize they're misunderstanding the status transaction of putting themselves on a higher and higher pedestal and pushing somebody down instead of understanding how to explain it so it's actually pushing them up.
I love that. So it's like a really nuanced idea here of the work that you do for your clients and the help that you provide them increases your status, but you don't want to increase it in such a way that it makes them go down on the seaside. You don't want them to feel overwhelmed. You don't want them to feel insecure. You don't want them to feel stupid. And so what are some tips that you have for somebody who's coming into a meeting with a client to present them with solutions that they're hired to present them with and not force them into that down in status?
So the way you do this, and this is what we see in Conan's performance on the show, we see that at each point in each question, he kind of has little things that he's ratcheting back to. Conan knows in the show that it's funny that if he laughs off every wing, he's declaring status over the wing, number one, but he's also like setting himself up because he knows he can't handle spice. And at some point, it's physically going to get the better of him, even if he's logically or emotionally declaring it's not. He knows that that contrast is funny, but you and I, at least not I, am not Conan. I am not that funny or that entertaining, but I can still understand in a situation where I'm meeting with the client, I'm going to keep measuring. Each of those questions serve as a measuring point. Each of those questions serve as I might be presenting the plan and they feel more and more confident. I can see it on their face. Oh my God, this is right. I can't afford that second home. Oh my God, this is right. I can pay for the grandkids' college. I can rethink about my business. And instead of just shutting the doors when I'm, 55 years old, maybe I should be selling this thing and it's worth something. I see all those things clicking. But then if there's something that tips it back, I have to notice, even if that's in the middle of the arc and everything's just a steadily increasing arc of confidence, and all of a sudden something shatters that, how do I get this back on track? And the only way you notice that is by continuously listening, because sometimes you're almost at the end and that's when the crack shows up. That's when Idris Elba wants to fight you. That's when the bomb breaks the guest and you're like, I don't even know if they can make it to the end on this one.
Yeah, I just like thinking back on all of the interviews that I've watched of Hot Ones, it's also interesting to see how Sean is willing to slow down. If a particular wing is too spicy or he knows it's going to be a challenge for the guest, he can pause and they'll match drink for drink. They'll like drink some milk together or they'll eat some ice cream or take a big swig of water. And like Sean's not in a rush to get anywhere. He's like, we'll just tackle this wing and you take as much time as you need to recover. And then we'll move on to the next wing. And even to the point where he knows, like you mentioned just a second ago, DaBomb. DaBomb is like this hot sauce for those of you who haven't watched the show that is like, it's been on almost since the very beginning. It's the only hot sauce that just stays permanently in its position because it's kind of like it's the brick wall that people hit. Even if they've been pretty confident through the first 6 wings, I think it's the 7th or the eighth wing. I think it is. It's always the 8th wing. And then they have 2 sauces.
I think it's the 7th wing.
It's the 7th or 7th wing.
I think it's number 7 because I think I tied that back to the Golden Mean for you.
Yeah, you're right. It's that 7th wing. So, they might have been really confident up to through the first 6 wings, and then the bomb hits, and he always is kind of like, hey, this next one can be rough. And he
great status tilt too.
Right.
He's like, this wing's objectively bad. This sauce is objectively horrible. It's just hot for hot's sake. It doesn't taste good.
If you can make it through this, you can make it through.
You can make it through the end.
Yeah. And so I love that he can like bolster their confidence. He can give them a warning. He can give them a heads up, and he knows what's coming. He knows his guests well enough, and is kind of empathetic enough to understand the hard things that might be coming and to help prep them for it and do it in a good-natured way that doesn't make them feel stupid.
I love this too, and I hadn't thought about it like this. DaBomb as the 7th wing, so basically beginning, middle, and end. So this is basically the climax of your movie. This is the thing where the last action sequence takes place in an action movie. This is where it doesn't mean it's like the ultimate climax of the event, but it's where the climax at least starts. So knowing in a meeting, like you have this check-in point right before stuff gets real, right before you get to the action items that have to be accomplished, right before you get to these things where Sean pauses for a second and does exactly what you said. Like, this one's objectively bad. If you can get through here, you can get to the end. That check-in point, that's setting up the beginning of the ending, basically, is a great strategic meeting planning lesson too. Don't need the script, but you need to know the structure to make it play out right.
Perfect. I want to continue on to this third point here, which is the third lesson that you learned from watching this interview, which is that you can draw influence from anywhere. I mean, I feel like we're kind of doing a meta version of this, drawing and showing people that you can draw influence from an internet spicy hot wings interview show. But can you dive a little bit deeper and talk about what you mean by that?
So there's a bit at the end, and whether you go watch the clip or I literally quote it in the piece, there's this thing. The last question Sean Evans asks Conan has to do with, if you could give somebody a book or give somebody one thing for like understanding comedy, what would it be? And Conan gives an absolutely one of many incredibly insightful, brilliant answers.
If you were crafting a curriculum of a comedy survey course, can you give us one book to make sure that your students understand that the building blocks of comedy are not at all new?
What are you gonna read? Read widely and read well. There's comedy in the Old Testament. There's comedy in the New Testament. You can read all kinds of stuff. Just don't lock yourself in to it's gotta be some comedy from the last 10 years. No, there's great comedy out there that was written a long time ago. What's funnier than Don Quixote, Sancho Panza? You know, this is good stuff. The classics are funny. You know, you can read Chaucer's tales. They're funny. There's funny everywhere. Don't be a snob. Look high and look low. A Mad Magazine is funny. There's funny stuff online all the time. There's no reason for us to try and exclude one category over another. These aren't the rantings of someone who's had some bad chemicals and overdid it to be funny and relevant to people who are at least 50 years younger than him. This is a guy who's just being on a show, and it's legitimate. So I say here's to you, Sean. You're a great motherfucking host.
Right back.
And I'm glad I'm here. And I'm glad we had a great time.
Part of this message is he's like, there's comedy everywhere. You should read widely. You should not just look at things for funny, especially not things that are known to be funny in the last few years as your source material. He's a wide-read historical fiction or historical person with wide-spanning interests, fact fiction and otherwise. And he's going to bring this all to the stuff. He does a Nixon interview, I think, partway through this one, where Nixon would be the best presidential Hot Wings guest. And he does an impression and everything. And he knows way more about Nixon than most people do, too. So this idea that you don't just see like the scripts and the patterns and the story blocks ever, but you see these structures everywhere. And you start to go, how is that useful for me in my work? And so like for me, I'm a big advocate. I have a personal blog that I've been running for years now called Cultish Creative, and I call this my personal archive. And it's the idea that you should just have complete thoughts. I have severe, undiagnosed ADHD. I like to joke that the only letters I have after my name, I have all these CFAs and CFPs and other things that I work with. And it's like, yeah, my letters after Matt Ziegler, put ADHD right there, because that pretty much sums it up. My brain is all over the place. But I have this personal archive habit that I've created over time that goes, if something really captures my attention, I'm going to force myself to stop, think about this thing, and put a complete thought around it, make it pretty short, and I'm going to store it for myself. And the idea is when I'm having a conversation with somebody and they start to bring up something that's of interest to them or whatever else, my ADHD has taken me all over the place before. Number one, I'm already curious. If you bring something interesting to the table and you're working with me, there's nothing that I am more interested in than the thing you're hyper interested in. I'm always fascinated by that. But then because I collect these things, I also have my own running collection. So it's like, oh, really? You're into like we've talked about this offline before too. Like you have all this amazing history in the relationship space. And so it's like, oh, like have you the admired leadership stuff, the Body Keeps the Score, all this psychological literature from like couples therapy and everything else, all the Edgar Schein stuff on culture and helping and relationships. Like, I know you love that stuff. And I love that I know you know this stuff too, because that's interesting. That's me bringing something that doesn't at face value have any meaning in this conversation or relationship, but behind the scenes, it can help us build a relationship. It can help us build rapport. It can help us find a common language that we can speak through. For me personally too, like I came up with a music background. I don't have a business or a traditional finance background, even though I've been doing this for almost 20 years at this point. It's this idea of, you sit down with music and it's like, oh, what styles do you like? It's like, I kind of like everything. And I don't say that to just be like ridiculous. It's no, I can tell you what I really like about classical. I can tell you what I don't like about classical. I can tell you about which iterations of these segments of jazz history I really love and which ones I can leave behind. And same thing with rock and punk and rap and everything in between. But it's this idea of use what fits in the moment. And you just need a broad palette to draw from to figure out what fits in the moment. If you're willing to do that in whatever way that fits you, you might only love fly fishing and golf, and that's the only thing of interest to you besides your family in the entire known universe. But then guess what? There's probably like a small group of fly fishermen and golfers that you could serve as clients. And you'd
Yeah.
all think like, "Ah, all these other people are friggin' nuts. You ever hear that Ziegler guy? He's out there talking about hot wings and jazz. Like, forget that guy. Perfect. It's a big world. Find people that you can use what you're interested in to help drive these conversations and relationships. Life's too short to do it any other way.
I agree. This reminds me of some research that I read recently. The folks over at Y Charts did a study. I don't know if you saw this, but they interviewed the clients, or they surveyed the clients of financial advisors to determine a whole bunch of different things. And one of the things that they found is that a really high percentage of clients in 2023, especially under the age of 60, either changed financial advisors or were highly considering changing advisors. And the number one reason really surprised me. It wasn't because of poor portfolio performance. It was because they didn't feel like their advisor had a deep understanding of them or their goals. So really what we're noticing, especially with these younger generations, this next generation of investors, is people desperately want to feel understood. They want to feel gotten. If I think if they're going to entrust somebody with the duty of helping them build their legacy, uh, they want to know that that person gets who they are. They want to know that the fact that Matt loves hot wings and jazz, or shows about hot wings and jazz at a minimum, is like it's an important thing. It's like part of who he is. And when you're able to pay attention, like even if you're not interested in the same things, being able to be interested in what your clients are interested in and care about the things that are important to them, that's going to go really far as building trust. So even if you do have a narrow kind of swath of interest, if you're only interested in a few things, I think this idea of drawing inspiration and influence from everywhere, being open to learning about the things that people are passionate and excited about and things that are important to them, are going to help you, especially on the relationship side as an advisor.
I knew this advisor years ago, not well, but like was aware of them. And it was one of those, like, you're having a conversation. It's like, oh, what do you do for holiday gifts or whatever else? I feel like he was Midwestern somewhere. And it was, basically it had to do with like a barbecue book or maybe like sauce or something. And I remember just being like, if somebody ever like met me once or talked to me once, or I'm like the kids of somebody's client who like goes to this person, and you send me a friggin' like barbecue textbook, like you just told me we're not friends.
Yeah.
Like you just told me you took your status and you put yourself up here, and I was just like, I'm either getting off the seesaw and walking away, or I'm gonna say something regrettable, probably back up because I feel
Yeah.
justified in it right now. That Y chart study, which I have not seen that study yet, so I'm super curious to see this thing now. But that echoes reality to me. If you're not investing in the relationship, if you're not coming into the conversation like Sean Evans, how do you do with spicy food? What's your history with spicy food? Did you grow up on it? Did you never have it? Do you hate it? Do you love it? Are you indifferent? Are you somewhere in the middle? Like these things that are basically We're going to talk about financial planning or estate planning or multi-generational gifting strategies or setting up a charitable remainder trust or a foundation or whatever the heck it's going to be. All these complicated things. It's like, okay, yeah, this is on the table. This is our hot sauce. This is something we're going to deal with. But if the first question is either some like demand or bold statement about these things, you're not asking for connection. You're declaring your status looking down. You're declaring that like, oh, I've already got the script. I know what I do this. I pound these things out in the industrially necessary way. You're not saying like, all right, we got to solve this common problem together. Tell me what you know. Like, we got to figure this out. We got to survive doing this thing. That's overlooked. I am positive. If I could go in, if we could go in and run a survey of all those people who left and why and unpack what was going on in those things, I bet that effort to extend that bridge across what was going on and have that conversation, I bet that didn't exist. Straight out of the essay too, talk a lot about how it's not about co-opting the story. If I send you the bottle of barbecue sauce and you're vegetarian or something like that, like I'm co-opting the story. I'm telling you what this is. Our job as advisors, if we want to keep clients, is to cooperate, not to co-opt, but to cooperate. We're not trying to enrage someone or risk enraging them. We're trying to engage them. We're trying to see what are the points that are going to make you want to answer back and actually share some of me with you. And if you can share some of me with you, then I can share a little bit of me, and we can start to go back and forth and get this seesaw to keep ratcheting higher instead of just tilting all the way to one direction and blowing a relationship for no good reason.
To reconnect this back to hot ones, I think the most popular phrase said by a guest to Sean, do you want to guess what it is?
No, this is amazing. I don't know this.
That's a great question. People say it all the time in almost every interview.
But why? Do you think they're stalling, or do you think it's
No, I think
an actual thoughtful reflection?
So this is where how I'll tie this in. I was reading. I saw a LinkedIn post last week by Brendan Fraser, and he asked the question: what is the number one skill that an advisor has to be good at if they want to be successful? And the majority of the answers were some variation on the theme of like, you have to be a good communicator, you have to be a good listener. And I would argue that listening is an important skill to have as an advisor, but really what's more important is being able to show your clients that you understand them. And that often comes through, like, you might be a great listener, but if the person who you're listening to doesn't feel listened to, if they don't feel understood, if they don't feel gotten, then you're not getting the impact that you probably desire. And so I think one of the most important things that you can do is learn to ask good questions, because asking good questions shows that you're a good listener, shows that you're listening to the struggles they might be having. It shows that you're paying attention to, like, it's a way of reflecting back what you're hearing. And that's really the most important part of listening, is being able to reflect back to the speaker, to your client. Hey, I get where you're coming from. I understand the challenge that you're facing. I understand the worry that you have. And so that's, to me, that's a beautiful, it's a beautiful lesson that we can steal from Sean in that format. And yeah, this is something I noticed.
What's fascinating about that, and it's a language thing. This goes back to my word and story nerdery obsession, is when I hear, and I know exactly the point Brent Fraser is trying to make, like, inside of this here too. Listening, the act of listening is not, so it's number one, it's not to listen, it's the act of listening as a process. You can't equate a snapshot to a movie. And I think the language that we use when we try to explain this stuff or whatever, people want to reduce it again down to this like known script, this known thing. Okay, it's a snapshot. Did you mirror in the conversation? Did you listen in the conversation? Did you take the right notes and put them into the right format to do the right summary at the end? All the crap AI can do, by the way. Is promising to do. But here's why it's not valuable. It's just the act of listening is not the snapshot. The movie is not the still. This idea of saying, like, you have to be a good listener, we can't reduce that down to like just the trigger pull on the gun or whatever the single kick of like the movement of the foot to make contact with the soccer ball before it goes. If we reduce it down to the snapshot that doesn't tell anything about the broader context that it takes place in, I think your point is perfect on this, because no matter what, that beginning, middle, and end that Sean is walking that guest through on this journey through these sauces with the series of questions and the series of him listening and playing with the interaction, mirroring, and all the stuff along the way. In fact, that's a perfect metaphor for what you just described, because he's going to keep on doing this thing. There's never one snapshot. It's just repeated iterations of this behavior in an evolving way, not a like revolving or a one-stop way. It's like, no, he's going to keep on evolving with this through the end of this story arc. Being meta-aware, self-aware of these things and how they play out in a relationship, and then practicing the skill of, did I make a good show? Did I make a good experience? Did they walk out of the meeting all charged up? Did I get a text message later or a phone call or an email that's like, we feel so much better after we meet with you? If you get that feedback, it doesn't need to be a testimonial on LinkedIn or something. Like if you just have clients being like, oh, I feel so much better after we talk. God, you're doing the right thing. That's all you need to know. You're going to make it in this business and whatever else. Having worked in a large firm in a more sales oriented environment for like a long, long time, I heard a lot of people that would try to reduce things down. Like, oh yeah, the client had a great meeting, but like, where's the commission at the end? Where's the other thing? Where's this? Where's that deliverable that I'm arbitrarily deeming as valuable? It's like, no, the thing that matters is I made the person feel right. And we have an ongoing business relationship that's worth a lot over the time. The grocery store doesn't care if I drop the blueberries in the checkout. You don't have to pay for that. Go get another one. Why? Because the lifetime value of that client buying a lifetime supply of blueberries, or at least for the decade or so anybody lives down the street from a grocery store, matters far, far more than like a 1 penny margin item. It's all about those interactions. It's all about, you got to understand the snapshot, but you got to understand it in the concept of that whole movie. I love the way you put that.
Thank you. I feel like you are really good at distilling the best parts of humanity. Like you watch this interview and you're able to break down like, why was this so impactful? Why was this so meaningful? And draw those connections. And I think that that's really ultimately what makes a good advisor a good advisor, is that you're a student of humans. You're a student of people, and you're just trying to understand and help and serve and try and solve valuable problems. And also, like, I'll link to some of the resources that you mentioned down below, but I want those who are watching right now to just like really think, this isn't a checklist. These are observations. These are really cool principles that will help you be a better human in the room with other humans who are coming to you for help. That's what I'm noticing talking to you. So thanks for
Have
bringing that
fun.
with you.
Have fun, be positive. We're all worried about this negativity in the world and how separate everybody feels and whatever else. Well, guess what? You can have one conversation with a person, no matter what their political affiliation is, no matter what their beliefs are, and you can have one great conversation. I'm not saying that one conversation is the one thing. It's not the snapshot that changes the world. But guess what? Just being a little bit positive, figuring out how to cooperate, having fun in situations where the person's willing to engage with you and you can make that happen, which curiosity, often the gateway to making these things happen, actually makes the world a better place. And seeing somebody like Conan go on a show and give us something to talk about positively with each other. It was over 1 million views, like practically right away on this thing. And it's just one of those where it's, there you go. Somebody did something in the world. And yeah, there's people online hating on it. I saw that. That was part of the reason I felt like I had to write the piece. Because I was like, how can people be negative about something? Like, just don't say it at all. Don't watch it. Why'd you waste 30 minutes of your life if you hated this thing?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
life's too short
It's
for that.
pushing
too.
10 million views now. I just checked.
Pushing 10 million views. So
Yeah,
here's the thing.
There's a reason for it.
Spend something, get curious. If you're curious, find somebody else who's curious too. Have a conversation. Yeah, it's a divisive, crappy, miserable world out there. Get off social media, talk to somebody, and make the world a little bit of a better place. Is that so hard? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Well, Matt, I really appreciate you giving up of your time and your brain and your thoughts and your knowledge, and for participating in the summit.
Nate, absolute pleasure. I love the work that you guys are doing. I am honored
Thanks, man.
to be a part of this.
Anything else you want to leave before we sign off? And if you want people to like follow you, or if they have questions for you, where should they reach out?
You can find me on LinkedIn at my name, Matt Ziegler, I before E, except after Z, as my mom taught me to tell people. You can find me cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. I'm active in all those places. And you can see, if you just go to the Cultish Creative website in particular, I've got the links all broken down for the YouTube shows and the other stuff I'm doing, trying to just show people, be curious, be a little bit crazy, know how to complete a thought, and just get people talking. I started a whole YouTube show just to get people talking to each other.
So
And it's
good.
been an absolute joy to get to talk to people like you, Nate, while I'm on this journey.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate you, man.